Welcome, everybody. We're back again with Jackson talking about some of the questions we got from you here at 15 Minutes and a Big Idea. The next one comes from my friend Dustin Gaskins. He was with us on our James Q&R. We've got a great community of question askers and listeners here and question respondees here at 15 Minutes and a Big Idea. And his question comes out of Philippians chapter 3, where I was talking about him. And I talked about knowing Christ like I know him, that I know how my friend Dustin thinks and acts and responds, and I've got to know his heart because of my time with him. And so his question is, how can you ensure that you know Christ like you know me? What are some steps that we can take? How can we understand that and knowing Christ personally in some sense? So what do you got, Jackson?
Well, I think there's this cloud of I'll call it perceived irreverence around calling Christ a friend in some circles, where people are afraid to look at it that way because they think it might take away some reverence. But Jesus did say in John 15:14, "You are my friends if you do whatever I command you."
Sure.
So to oversimplify and maybe not make the episode as long as it needs to be, or as long as it could be.
Oh, we're gonna milk it. Don't worry.
Yeah, that if you want to enhance your concept of Jesus as your friend, do what he tells you to do.
Amen.
Do what he asks you to do. Do what he needs you to do. Treat him like you would treat a friend. Be there for him in that sense of, a friend asks me to do something for him or her, I'm going to be there for them. Sharing in struggles with someone makes me close to them as a friend. The whole concept of Philippians has been sharing in the struggle of Jesus, sharing in his suffering, having our life as a model of his suffering. So in a way, all of Philippians can teach us how to be a friend to him, to share in that suffering, to develop that kind of camaraderie with him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all those things with obeying the commands of Christ is what I would say. There's kind of one practice of obeying the commands of Christ, along with adopting the mind of Christ and prayer. I mean, these three things to me are really the process that we do in faith that God will change us. And I wish I could try to find a little more concrete way to do it, but I'm just not sure it exists. Like it's like whenever I hesitate with this analogy, but here we go. Which should get you excited probably. But it's like when you're like 13 and 14 years old and people talk about dating and they say you just need to get to know the girl. And you're like, what does that mean? It's like I've already got friends who are girls and things like this, but then as you begin to develop more relationships with people, there's time together and there's communication and there's mutual interaction in shared experiences. But like you can't write the script, you know what I mean? Like there's no script that you do these things. You can put yourself in situations to know someone, but you can't, like, the knowing happens in a way that's not really scientific, I guess. That it's not like it's not like I mean, we have general patterns we have with dates, right? Like, at least in our culture, you go to dinner and you go to a movie and you the next day, you walk around the park and, and whatever these traditional things are. These practices are in some sense a way in which it happens, but like, what are the things that click in place where now you know this person well enough to decide if you move forward or not? Like that's a bit more mysterious.
It is, but it succeeded for many and many years before it was ever a science. Before there were ever date doctors, people managed to figure it out, and it was it's kind of the elusive concept of the understood thing, of the thing that's just understood among people, that this is the way that it works. And maybe it's our modern brains that can't comprehend how easy it is to become friends with Jesus, because we want to have the scientific, we want to have the step-by-step process, we want to have the New York Times bestseller 10 steps to become Jesus's best friend. And I don't know. I mean, I don't want to discount it, because some people like myself want that mechanical aspect of things. I want the step-by-step so that I can know that I'm there, so that I can have that confidence. But I do think what you're talking about with the prayer aspect and the mind aspect, especially the prayer aspect, is very I wouldn't say discounted, but something that's understood that I know I need to pray more. I know I need to pray more. But then we look at friendships that we have, and when we lack communication with friends, how quickly do those friendships suffer?
Oh,
Like, we all have
absolutely.
friendships where, we can pick up right where we left off. You and me are a good example of that.
Yeah,
We picked up right where we left off after living apart for some time. But I don't think that Jesus is one of those kinds of friends that we can just, I mean, maybe we can pick up to a degree, but the relationship definitely suffers when we're not talking
sure.
to him.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so we've got to put ourselves in situations where those moments of knowing can happen. And so you can
Yeah,
sort of, in some sense, you almost engineer the environment for them to happen, but you can't engineer them
yeah.
themselves. And so yeah, with prayer, especially pouring our heart out there and feeling those range of human emotions as we talk to God as a father.
Mhm.
Um, and then to come back to the commands deal, I think that's just really helpful in doing what Jesus says to do, because what's the pattern or what's the goal and the target of obeying the commands?
Hmm? Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. No,
No, I thought that you were gonna, like, follow up immediately with the
yeah, I
rhetorical.
realized there was a risk I was taking. Okay, yeah, yeah. So what's the target of obeying the commands of Jesus? What are we trying to do?
We're trying to conform to his image.
Yeah, we're trying to be like Jesus.
Yeah.
And so when you act like someone, there's that whole saying of walking a mile in someone else's shoes.
Mhm.
That when you experience their experiences, you understand them.
Mhm.
And that's the idea you wanna get to,
Yeah.
is that when we go and we, um, we have the chance to choose our own preferences. We have the chance to choose our own way, and instead we say, "No, no, we're not gonna do that." Instead of forcing my will into the situation, let's say I don't know, we're having a church function or a local setting of some sort, and we're deciding on what the menu is going to be, right? It's like, well, I like barbecue, because barbecue is the best.
Mhm.
And somebody's like, well, I like tacos, and you're like, well, tacos are pretty good, but it's not as good as barbecue.
Mhm.
This is all rhetorical because I could flip a coin on those two, but it's like, well, what is it? And we're like, instead of letting this be a power thing in like a war or whatever, just be like, yeah, let's just do it your way, right? I don't really prefer that, but like I'm gonna go with your preference because I prefer unity more.
Yeah.
And we see the value of things don't have to be a fight. We can
Mhm.
see the value of moving things forward in unity and joy, and that like being on the same team is more important than doing it my way. And like
Yeah.
the objective is bigger than my aggrandizement. Like when we see that, like that's when we know the mind of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and not to get too far off into a totally different book with
Go.
different concepts, but I mean, Romans 14 makes me think of Romans 14, where it's like this whole narrative about how people have preferences and judgments that they're elevating above relationships in the body and
Sure.
elevating above the gospel to a degree, and there's that famous line, it's like, "Who are you to judge another man's servant?"
Mm,
And it's like, whether we live or die under the Lord, we are the Lord's, and that's the mindset that you have to have in those moments of that preference, barbecue, taco, whatever. It's like the preference and the judgment and the liberty doesn't matter in this situation. What matters, like you said, is the unity.
mm. Well, I mean, and to even hit on this again, this isn't a far. We're just going to wrap this around perfectly. What he says there, about how the strong are ought to bear with the weak, because Christ, the reproaches of those who reproach you fell on me. I mean, whenever we choose to say like, even we say, hey, like let's say it's the other way around, because usually barbecue is more expensive than tacos. So let's say that. So like I can make a
Mhm,
case that tacos are going to be better, but this
mhm,
other person over here, like they're actually kind of prone to not be able to handle disagreement really well.
mhm,
So I'm like, hey, this will be better. This will be cheaper. But instead, I'm going to give of my own funds to do the
mhm.
barbecue because meat's more expensive. Like I'm going to give of
Right.
myself there
Yeah,
and endure this. And this isn't even a huge sacrifice. I'm trying to make something
yeah,
like pretty easy to see. But like I'm like, okay, I'm gonna give of myself and not have it my way, and I'm gonna spend more money on an idea that I don't like as well, so that your weakness, that this doesn't become a stumbling block for you, not like in a condescending way, right? Because we can get all like out of sorts there, but like in a way of like, hey, I care about you. and I care about what you need, and so I'm going to serve you rather than serve myself. Like that's literally doing what Jesus did, where the reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me.
Right. You're sacrificing your preference for a cheaper meal for what they like.
Sure.
Yeah. And that's the principle of the whole thing, sacrifice.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, really, this is man, you're segueing me perfect today, bro. I don't know what you had in your coffee this morning, but it's working for you.
Collagen peptides, man.
You put collagen in your coffee? Cool.
It's I mean, ice baths, collagen peptide, like whatever the current trend is.
All right, let's run this back over here, as good as that was. But really, in suffering, I mean, this is what Philippians 3 is about, right? There's some sense in which Philippians 3 is this like hype 'em up text, but it's a call to descend into the sufferings of Christ. That Philippians 1 talks about how it's been granted to us to suffer on behalf of Christ. That in many ways, how do we know Christ? We know Christ when we suffer. That he was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. That when we experience that, that's when we really know Jesus. And we see Philippians chapter 2 that sort of service leads to exaltation by God, because we believe that God can raise us up.
Amen.